All right, hey YouTube, what's up? It's Michael here again. Thank you for joining me. First things first, I do have to apologize for the longer wait between my last video and this one. My life's a little bit all over the place. I'm in the process of packing everything up so I can move a few states away. So next couple of weeks might be a little bit sparse on content, but I am still here and I'm still working on it. Anyway, so this week we're going to be talking about Elantris. I am finally finished with the main entries into the Cosmere. I know there's still stuff like Steelheart and White Sand, and I think one or two others that I haven't finished, but in terms of the main entries into the Cosmere, I am done. So, with Elantris, first things first, overall thoughts. It is one of the more difficult reads I've had for the Cosmere. In terms of pacing, I will say it is closer to his Warbreaker level of pacing as opposed to something like books 2 and 3 of Stormlight. Because it is another one of those books that feels like a slow build up to what will be the sequel instead of contained story in and of itself. It's hard for me to decide if I think this one or Warbreaker is slower because, like I said in my Warbreaker review, that book builds up a lot and plants a lot of little seeds for you to figure out later. So you learn that more was happening once you finish the book than you thought while you were reading it. And that doesn't really happen in this book. There isn't a lot of twists and turns that make you realize more was happening than you thought. It is almost entirely a slow build-up to a lot that happens right at the end in the last like 10% of the book. And that's the other thing, is that with Warbreaker, while it does have those little twists and turns and seeds planted to show you that more was happening than you thought, what it doesn't have is a massive bombastic action scene that Brandon normally has. Its action scenes are a little bit more tame, which might be the wrong word, but you know what I'm trying to say. And this book does have that. While it only has it in the last like 10 to 15% of the book, it has it, and it has it in a big way. A lot happens in terms of the action in that bit, but you will be waiting for it the entire time. Now, the plot, I will say it was, in terms of his fantasy plot archetypes, he went a lot more with the noble court political drama style narrative than he normally does. This is definitely his most political intrigue style narrative that he's done, and that's an aspect of his writing that I've never had an issue with. I really enjoyed it in the second two Mistborn books. With Elend, I enjoy the bits that Shallan does with that. I enjoyed it with even, not at first, but eventually I came to even enjoy it with Vin and her excursions and pretending to be a noble. I really enjoy the way Brandon writes, having to maneuver through political affiliations, etc., etc. I think he does that really well. I don't think this is his best example of it, but it's still pretty good. It was enjoyable enough for me to continue through the book. But if that's not something that you enjoy from his writing normally, which is something that I've heard from other people, that they don't love that aspect of his stories, if that's you, this might not be the Sanderson book for you, because it is mostly that. But now what I want to do is talk about the characters, because despite everything else I've said, despite everything else I will talk about, the characters in this book are the main source for me of both things that I liked and grievances with the story. So we'll start with the bad and then work towards the good. Now, there are 3 main characters, which seems to be a number that Brandon is very comfortable with. He often has the 3 main characters. In this, you have Rauden, Serene, and Hrathen. Let's start with talking about Rauden. Because I will say he was probably my least favorite character. Not because as a person or anything he was bad or cruel or unlikable, but just as a character that I'm reading and trying to enjoy, I found him boring. Brandon wanted to write a character who was good and optimistic for the sake of being good and optimistic, not because they had some kind of tragic backstory that led them to feeling the way they do. And I understand that inclination. I get that, and I think he did a pretty decent job at writing a character like that. I just don't find characters like that very interesting. It's kind of the Superman problem, I guess, where if he's always going to make the right choice, what stakes are there? Why am I interested? I just didn't have a lot to get invested with in terms of seeing Rauden grow, seeing him make any changes to his life. He didn't really have to, so I found his parts very boring. I didn't feel the passion to get through it when he was the character on screen. That being said, the stuff he was doing I found interesting, with building up New Elantris and studying Aeon Dor. That stuff was interesting. I wanted to see more of that. I just wish it had been happening through a different character's POV. So next, let's move on to Serene. I liked her better than Rowden because I feel like she had more to do. I feel like she had places to grow into and a different person to become throughout the book. That being said, I didn't objectively love the kind of plot line she had. So I said before in my Warbreaker review that I am not generally a fan of romances in my books. Like I said, I think they're awkward normally. I also said that Brandon is one of the few exceptions to that. He writes romances really well and earnestly. Now, Elantris is the exception to that exception. One, there's not even really a romance for the most of the book because the main character thinks her love interest is dead. Instead, what we get is a character who is really upset the entire time that she's unable to find a relationship for herself, and that every time she gets close, something goes wrong and gets in the way. Now, as a person who is perpetually single, that's something I can actually relate to quite a bit. But also, as a person that's perpetually single, it's not something I want reminders of. So I just didn't find myself enthralled with her plotline, but it was well written and well executed. It just wasn't a plotline that I was inclined to enjoy personally. So that's most of my issue with that, not any issue with the writing like it was with Rowden. But now, when we get to the third main character, this is where things get good. So the third main character is a character named Hrathen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I don't care. Hrathen is my favorite character from this book by a mile. He is well and truly far above Serene and Rowden. There is just something about the way that Brandon writes a crisis of faith that hits me right in the heart. If you watch my Mistborn review, you'll see how much I absolutely love Sazed. He is my favorite Cosmere character, bar none. And Hrathen, while not getting close to that level of love, the plotline and the story and the development that Hrathen got with having to struggle and deal with the conflict between his belief that his religion is giving him the purpose to help people and save people, while at the same time having to deal with his religion forcing him to cause harm to people. That conflict damages him visibly, and it hurts him, and he uses every little trick to lie to himself to ignore the conflict in his own mind throughout the entire book, and it's beautifully written. You can tell that Brandon has really dealt with his own doubts with his religion, and as somebody who dealt with that myself growing up and came to a different conclusion than Brandon, nonetheless, he writes it beautifully and relatably, and it's just executed phenomenally. I cannot put into words how well Brandon writes somebody not only having faith, but doubting it and questioning it, and then coming to a satisfactory conclusion at the end that doesn't take away from their faith. So anyway, I don't want to ramble on too much longer. I could honestly talk about Hrathen for hours. If Brandon wanted to go and rewrite Elantris from Hrathen's point of view, I would be there to buy it on day freaking one. I loved that character to death. But final thoughts, I will give it a solid 5.5 out of 10. It is just above average, but not remarkably so. It's not a bad book. It's definitely enjoyable, and if you are interested in the Cosmere, you definitely need to pick it up. You do get some information in it that you are going to want, and it's an enjoyable read just as a standalone fantasy book, but it's not going to be anywhere near my top 10. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, all the things. I will see you hopefully next week, but at the very least, next time.